Because before we get back to the thing that everyone's talking about, I want to talk about the new Netflix docuseries, Worst Roommate. Which, strangely enough, had an episode which took place in Philadelphia and ran aground of what I had originally planned, which was to speak about this particular docuseries. So, spoiler alerts ahead. I'm going to discuss pretty much everything about the 4 or 5 episodes. And, you know, if you haven't, it's still worth a watch, even if you listen. But you haven't been warned. So, Worst Roommate Ever covers 4 tragic living situations. And while a lot of people are going to talk about trust, I suspect there might even be a little victim blaming. But there's going to be a lot of be careful who you trust. Can't trust anybody. And don't find things on Craigslist. And I gotta tell you, I only have minor regrets of finding the fabulous Odysseus Khufu on Craigslist, number 1. And number 2, as I always said, push-ups, more push-ups, would fix the situation. I know. What do you mean, more push-ups? Well, what I mean by that is self-focus. Okay? How does self-focus, however, help external conflicts? Help you with external threats? Something like what we see in this docuseries. Oof. Well, let's first take a look at the folks who committed the act presented and how they presented to their world, yeah? So popping in here, we have Dorothea Puente, as they pop up, Jameson Bachman, right, who was a New York lawyer, supposedly. We have Yosef Kater, a Palestinian marathoner, right? Another man by the name of Casey Joy, mild-mannered, middle-aged man, right? And what do I mean by how they presented? Well, in each of them, we see a few things. In Dorothea, there's the elderly suburban granny. Goes to church, gives to charity, helping the unfortunate. She's unassuming. She's better than you or I. She goes every Sunday and volunteers during the week. And by the way, she's so old. Nimble, but old. And Casey Joy, mild-mannered, middle-aged man, very quiet, they say. But without really knowing anything, after the deed is done, part of what throws off suspicion on him, or at least slows the cops down, is the fact that he has a language barrier. And then Yusuf, this Palestinian marathoner, who meets another man of Palestinian descent. And being that they're both in a foreign land, find kinship in their shared brotherhood. And lastly, Jameson Bachman, a New York City lawyer in Philadelphia on business for a case. He'll be in for a little while, but here's a wad of cash and I'm ready to move in right away. Now with each of us we could say, well, some of these sound suspicious, some of them too good to be true. And of course, there'd be no docuseries if you weren't correct. But it's the how they got away with it that's important here, that your push-up game would come into play. Because even though on the outside presented Dorothea was this elderly woman, in fact she was about a decade younger than she presented, and took on the mannerisms, took on the dress, the schedule, the habits of a woman much older than herself, and presented to the world that idea of the harmless granny. Meanwhile, she had one heck of a life. You never knew who was living next door to you, let me tell you. Because Granny was, well, using tenants, these individuals who were either homeless or in a behavioral health institute but had been thrown out. She would use them for their Social Security checks. And once they were secured, it seems she would dispose of them in the garden. And I only say that way to put off YouTube's censorship. Do watch, but watch with caution. Yes. Meanwhile, not going into Mr. Joy and what he did, but after he came under suspicion with the police, he turned on a brand new accent, using the biases of the police against them. Two ways. One, if they can't speak to him or it's very frustrating, they're likely or more likely to give up. And we as English speakers are kind of conditioned to thinking of ourselves as superior for some reason if someone doesn't speak our language clearly. Now, a lot of languages could be guilty of this. I just know in English we are specifically, especially in the United States, guilty of this. And so on the one hand, you can look at him as dumb, and on the other hand, you can look at him as a nuisance. But either way, it kept the police at bay for a while, until he, in fact, slipped up, and in one of the silliest of ways. And then in the case of Jameson Bachman, he was a New York lawyer, or at least that was the story. Turns out he was a serial squatter, and had been doing it all up and down the East Coast. He knew the law very well. He knew how to manipulate the system. And once he would move in, that would be it. He would be in a permanent non-paying tenant until eviction and all these other things could happen. But the interesting part of this, and the one case, which really stood out to me, was the case of Yusuf Kader, here on the screen right now. Because part of his game, part of his shtick to one of the people that he was conning was that he was, in fact, a Palestinian marathoner. And as such, I was wondering why my music went out. And as such, he preyed upon another Palestinian national who was living in the same country. I think they were in Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody let us know in the comments. I don't remember. I think they were in Denmark. Oh, no, they were in South America at the time, right? I believe so. Let us know down in the comments. I'm thinking off of memory. I think one of them happens. Something happened in Denmark that I watched recently, but it wasn't this. This was somewhere else. Let us know in the comments. I could look it up, obviously, but I'm going to let you people get involved with me here. But the thing about Yusuf, what was interesting is that when we met the man he would ultimately swindle out of money, Yusuf used the man's nationality, his patriotism, his love of country against him, right? And that is where the push-up game comes in. Because it's at this point that we have to realize that in each of these cases, whether it be the granny who looks and seems utterly harmless, trying to get the buds back here, the granny that seems utterly harmless, or the young Palestinian running for his country, running for his nation, feeding and manipulating an individual. Oh, my earbuds died. That's why they're dead. That's why the music stopped. Taking advantage of an individual because of his patriotism. These were stereotypes, limitations that we as people, that these individuals, and we in general, put on ourselves, looking when the folks took advantage of the stereotypes that were created in mind. They took advantage of the fact that stereotypes keep us looking outward, keeping us looking at others. If we're not looking at others, then we can't look, in a sense, within. If we are looking at others, I'll say, and we're not looking within, ultimately, how can we tell what we're seeing in the other person if we don't look at what we ourselves are expressing? So like we discussed last week, if I see behavior that I don't like, that really gets under my skin, there's a good bet that it reminds me of something that I do to some degree. Sometimes it is just a bad memory, but that is the explanation as to why it's such a thing. when that isn't the explanation, when it's not a bad memory, when it's not tied to a trauma, well then why does it get under your skin then? Let me know in the comments, as always. And then follow us on Facebook and TikTok at With Marcus, and on Twitter and IG at With_Marcus. And then, of course, join these amazing people over on Patreon. And allow me to say thank you to them for being the first to join the community while we get the lights just right. And we hit our patron goals, and helping us hit our patron goals. And as we do so, we'll add more benefits, behind the scene access alongside classes, some after hours things, and deeper dives into your own mindful fitness adventure.